Good evening. Very warm welcome to St. Margaret's, especially if you've not been with us before. Wonderful to have you here tonight. Just sort of housekeeping. If you need the loos, they're just through into the parish centre, which is through the door that way. The bar is open at the back, so do have a drink. Please do give a donation if you can. These recitals and performances are only possible through the generosity of the people who come. It's wonderful that we've got a nice crowd tonight. So do tell your friends to come and enjoy live music of the highest quality in Putney. And do, if you're able to, support them, because that way we can make sure that we keep enticing people of the highest quality to Putney. Wonderful to have our recital series and continue with this sort of theme of pianos through the autumn. Had some really wonderful performances already. Tonight we have a well-known favourite who has played for us many times before and been part of most of our recital seasons. So would you please welcome Robert Bridge?
Thank you. Very nice to see you all. I was thinking about my program the other day and thought it's a bit like my fridge. And I guess the analogy is pretty self-evident, but I thought I'd just unpack it for you a little bit. So at the end of this program, you're going to hear a piece of music by Franck, the Prelude, Chorale, and Fugue. I've known this piece for many years, but hadn't actually picked it up to start learning it until a couple of months ago. So this piece is from the freshest ingredients in my fridge. In the middle of the program, there's a set of pieces by Brahms, which I learnt about a dozen years ago. Played a few times, but never felt I got quite on top of. Felt that they would be worth a revisit. It's a bit like one of those casseroles that you put away, knowing that another day you'll reheat them and find even greater depths of flavor and interest. And then there's the third scherzo by Chopin. I fell in love with this piece when I was a teenager and managed to persuade my slightly compliant piano teacher to let me loose on it. It was quickly apparent, I think to both of us, that it was well beyond me. So that got discarded and put at the back of the top shelf of my fridge, in amongst a number of other rather interesting, slightly dusty bottles. And every so often I'd take it out and notice that it was the sell-by date was even less visible than it was before, and put it back again. There comes a point with some of the contents of your fridge where you're kind of at a binary moment. You're either going to use them or you're going to discard them. And there was a point with this piece where I thought, I've either got to learn it or I never will. And the catalyst for that was a conversation with one of my pupils, one of my adult pupils, who came in one day. And the conversation turned to this piece. And I said what a monster I thought it was to play. And she said, on the contrary, she said, I think it's actually quite easy. There's a couple of slightly tricky bars, but it's actually not a difficult piece at all. So I felt rather humbled by this comment, if not a little piqued. So I thought I'd program it today. And you'll understand if I try to make it sound as difficult as possible. Chopin wrote 4 scherzos that span his compositional career. The word scherzo would suggest something which is playful, literally a joke. I can tell you that the Chopin scherzos are no joke. But what is common to the 4 scherzos is an interest in rhythm, and playing kind of rhythmic games. 2 of the scherzos, the second and fourth, this is a playful element. But in the other 2, the first and the third, rhythm is used as a driving force. It's a piece of great passion, sense of impetus. In between the rather ferocious passages of writing, however, there's some interludes. Chopin introduces a chorale theme, echoed by cascading patches of notes, which was the thing that as a teenager I fell in love with. Before I play it, I'd like to play one of the Chopin studies, also in the same key, C-sharp minor. Chopin wrote 2 large sets of studies, which are fairly formidable technical challenges for the most part, But in amongst them, there are some rather quieter pieces which test out different aspects of a player's skill. This one from the second set, the Opus 25 set, is a test, I guess, of balance, managing textures, and also it involves a very expressive left-hand line, which has led to its nickname as the cello. Brahms was a colossal figure in the late 19th century. He dominated the second half of the 19th century. As composer and also as pianist, he was a very considerable pianist, and it's no surprise that much of his music involves the piano either in a prominent or dominant role. Two massive piano concertos, huge wealth of chamber music and vocal music involving piano, and of course the solo piano music itself, which falls into two main groups. Right at the beginning of his life, when he writes three huge sonatas that were tributes to Beethoven, and at the end of his life, when he writes a series of four sets of piano pieces. In between, there are scattered pieces, including sets of variations. A bit like Beethoven returning to the quartets of his life, so the solo pieces at the end of Brahms' life seem to occupy special importance for him. They run from Opus 116 through to Opus 119. And after these pieces, there is a pair of viola and clarinet sonatas, Opus 120, four series songs, a set of organ chorale preludes. At that point, he hangs up his hat. This is in the early 1890s that these pieces have been written. He dies in 1897. So these pieces, the Opus 119 pieces, are actually the last solo pieces he wrote. Of course, with hindsight, it's perhaps easy to give them a significance that they may not have had for Brahms. But certainly they offer, in the four pieces, a kind of wonderful retrospective and kind of summation of different sides of his personality. The set starts with two intermezzi. The first is rather wistful, and the complex harmonies reach a hand across into the 20th century. I once pair these pieces with the early sonata by Alban Berg, Second Viennese School, written about 15 years later. You'll be forgiven at times for wondering which composer was which. The second intermezzo is more elusive, anxious, it's frightened. In the middle is a hark back to a beautiful German folk song, a Ländler, Brahms' Liebeslieder waltzes, sunny Brahms. Third movement is a capriccio, graceful, lively, the old man kicking his heels in the air one last time. And the last movement, the Rhapsody, is massive and imposing, clearly not a man who's going to go gentle into the night, more of a bang than a whimper. Not only is this the newest piece, it's also using the newest and most up-to-date technology, the iPad and the foot pedal. Never done this before. What can possibly go wrong? César Franck, Belgian composer, pianist, organist. There's an interesting thing which I could expand on for years and bore you rigid about musical styles. We divide musical styles rather neatly around dates. So anything at the beginning, from the beginning of the 19th century onwards, we call the Romantic period. And in the 50 years before that, late 18th century, we call that the Classical period. And we typify that with people like Mozart and Haydn. Clean-cut lines, simple textures, clear grammar of the music. And the Romantic period is often portrayed as not only a reaction to, but a rejection of what had come before in the Classical period. And as I guess we can all probably appreciate, however free you want something to be, however expressive you want it to be, actually if it doesn't have some kind of grammar or syntax behind it, it just becomes incomprehensible and gibberish. And what happened with Romantic composers, and this is certainly true of the two men you've heard so far, Chopin and Brahms, was that they adhered to very strong classical principles in the way they wrote. As did César Franck, who as an organist was obviously inspired by the great organ composers like Bach, and set out in this piece to write a Prelude and Fugue, and then decided to insert the chorale into it. The language is very rich and evocative and expressive, and as one might expect from a composer whose kind of natural instrument is the organ, the textures at times, particularly towards the end, have become very thick and very massive. The piece has 3 movements, although they play without a break. One of the things that Franck is celebrated for is its use, development of what is called cyclic form. Again, this was a preoccupation through the 19th century amongst Romantic composers and artists as well, to find unity between apparently disparate pieces of art. So for much of the 19th century composers and the 18th century composers have written pieces that might be in separate movements. And if like, each movement would be discrete from the other, a separate piece, as in the Brahms pieces you've just heard. One of the things that Franck explored was the use of cross-references across the piece, so that actually the pieces start to interweave. And there is, at the end of this piece, about 15 minutes in, I guess, I think an extraordinary moment where the piece is built to what seems to be a really kind of imposing climax and then cuts off abruptly. And there is this flurry of notes that appears from the piano, which Franck instructs the performer to treat quasi-cadenza, as if a cadenza, i.e. as though you're improvising at this point. And to begin with, the notes kind of seem rather random. They don't make a lot of sense. And then gradually they start to focus and coalesce. And what one hears is the figuration from the beginning of the Prelude reappear and interweaved into it the theme from the Chorale. Whether you pick this up consciously or unconsciously, I don't know, but I think it has the effect of a rather magical piece of déjà vu. Very much enjoyed working on this piece over the last couple of months. Hope you enjoy it too. Just before Brutus comes up and tells you about some much more interesting concerts that are going on here for the next few weeks, I thought I'd like to play you one more piece. At the beginning of this program, which probably now seems rather a long time ago, I played you a study in C-sharp minor by Chopin. I'd like to play you another study in C-sharp minor. This one written right at the end of the century, in between when Franck and Brahms were writing their pieces, by a kid who was just 15 years old, who was much enamored of Chopin, certainly in the first part of his life. And although I've got no proof of this, I believe that this piece was directly inspired by the piece you heard at the beginning of the program. The study in C-sharp minor, was 2, number 1, by Scriabin.
coming next, because that's always quite useful. We have something quite different next week, so there'll be no comparison. We have Emily White, who's playing trombone with a pianist called Sam, and she has a particular gift for bringing out the human voice aspect of the trombone, and is performing works by a whole variety of composers who will be very familiar, people like Peter Warlock, Clara Schumann, Stanford, Mozart, and lots of other people. But I think it'll be quite different and quite interesting. I've never been to a trombone recital, so quite excited to join us for that next week. If I can urge you once again always to support our recitals in any way that you can, but also just to give a huge thank you to Robert for a wonderful performance with some really inspiring and evocative pieces tonight, and always so beautifully introduced, which helps us understand and learn so much more about the music as well. So a final round of applause for Robert. Thank you very much.